Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
Let me kind of back this up a little bit. So after that year, I wasn't allowed to do it anymore for some, like cultural stigmatization and the, Staten Island culture. However, it kind of deterred me from doing any kind of other athletics. So as I became, I want to say 21, 22, that college graduate age, I kind of found myself getting back into my athleticism, through weight training, yoga practices, all which evolved over the next, several years. But that was something that was dormant for me for a long time.
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joining today, he's a mental health nurse practitioner and relationship expert. It's Dr. John DeOka. How are you doing today, John?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Staten Island, New York. Born in Brooklyn, lived there for a little bit, but mostly grew up in Staten Island, New York. Now I live in New Jersey. So, as a kid, and I kind of relate to this now, I was always on the introverted side. So I did a lot of solo play, a lot of creative projects. And my comfort zone was in my solitude. So pretty much, your typical kid activities of going out, I did all that too, but I really found joy in my solace and really, taking time and creating things, whether it be drawing or anything like that. I'm not so much of an artist this day, but definitely when I was younger, that was kind of what inspired me.
Was there ever a specific moment that found that introvert side where you really enjoyed that kind of solo aspect and what you mentioned, like artistic side or the creative side?
I did enjoy creation. So I think the answer to this is a little twofold, right? So my creative side intermingles with my introvert side, but I definitely think when I was younger, being an introvert wasn't appreciated as it is today. So I don't know if I really embraced that side of me more so, kind of look to overcome it, which I think nowadays I kind of define myself as a non-shy introvert.
Was there anyone that was a big motivator for you growing up? Did you have someone that was close to you, someone that you could talk about things with?
What age are we talking here? Because I think there's been stages.
If there's multiple people, you can talk about where those changes had, like growing up, getting older to that teenage years. Usually we kind of see where people really find that person that really takes them to their next level.
So I found a lot of inspiration in fictional characters, but this was more of a younger age. So I think, things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, X-Men, I think a lot of them contributed to my overall development. I know we didn't really get into this now. For me, I had lost my parents very young, so 13 and 19 for my mom and dad. So then I think also navigating that time, because my dad wasn't a big part of my life. He was in the home with me, but not instrumental in my development. I think also just who I kind of met along my path in different ways. So I know in college, the nursing faculty were big inspirations for me. And sometimes even just friends, families, and modeling behaviors and customs that I wasn't necessarily born into. That answers your question.
Yeah. So with the loss of family members, you were finding people that kind of were taking those skill sets of a parent would do, be that person to talk to. Like you talked about the family or your friends' family members, their mothers and fathers. Was there anything that from your parents that you remember them saying to you that you kind of keep to you today? Is there a phrase, a quote, a skill set that is always still intact into you today that was big for them?
Not really a phrase or a quote. I think one thing that my mom did a good job at was keeping the element of tradition alive. So whether it be around the holidays, and not just Christmas, but more so, things like Halloween and kind of embracing all the things that come with the season, being out in the pool during the summer. I think that's pretty much my biggest takeaway from my parents is how gratifying and nostalgic tradition could be, and why I try to incorporate it as I can into my own practice now, as I've been on my own for a long time. But I don't think in terms of a phrase or a mantra, anything like that. Nothing came.
I like the tradition because that's something my
Mhm.
family has brought up to me is remember those traditions because you'll look back at those times and that will be such a signature part that you'll remember. I always remember Spaghetti Tuesday with family. Anytime I would go to my grandparents' house, we'd always have that as a meal. Do I do that today? No, but I've created that same concept, but in other formats. Maybe it's a different day, a different meal. But you always, I love the tradition aspect because it's so huge nowadays. Because you're people who look years from now will remember those small things, especially holiday times.
And as small as it is, it really, you know, helps with your well-being. So like when I look back at those memories, like this is what stands out to me. And I think it's really built this sentimental side of me. I remember, well, even like for meals, right? You mentioned spaghetti Tuesdays. So like typically my mom would cook from Sunday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday would be either takeout or go out to eat as a family. So while I don't have kids at this time, like that's something I would kind of want to incorporate into my family, once I'm at that time in my life. But when it comes to outside my parents, some of the things were simple, and some of the things too, I feel like even, media helped at that time shape me as well. So, even finding appreciation in like home decor, where
Mm.
that wasn't really a big value of mine growing up, it became a value of mine because what I saw outside, I wanted to have it for myself. So even that's an example of something I could have taken that's small that kind of shaped me as I became an adult.
As you're getting older, did you find new things that you enjoyed doing as we're getting towards that teenage, young adult stage?
Yeah. So Um, you know, one thing when I was younger that I wanted to do, that I enjoyed doing, that I didn't get to experience enough of, was gymnastics. So I only got to do it for a year, and then that was it. But as I got older, once actually, let me kind of back this up a little bit. So when I after that year, I wasn't allowed to do it anymore for some, like cultural stigmatization and the Staten Island culture. However, it kind of deterred me from doing any kind of other athletics. So as I became, I want to say 21, 22, that college graduate age, I kind of found myself getting back into my athleticism, through weight training, yoga practices, all which evolved over the next, several years. But that was something that was dormant for me for a long time.
What specifically about gymnastics caught your attention? Was there an event, kind of the skills that those athletes have?
It was, I think ultimately though, like again, probably Power Rangers inspired it at that time. But actually doing it and then kind of like, being able to test yourself outside your limits, I think that was going on in the background, but obviously probably not going through like a 6 or 7 year old's mind at that time.
I love the Power Ranger reference because they
Right.
do backflips and you're like,
Yeah.
there's no way someone can
Right.
like go that kind of arch in a backflip. But
Uh-huh.
anything that they do, I think younger people are like, oh, I want to do all those turns and stuff. And then as you're getting
Mhm.
older, you're like, how do they do this constantly? And it just amazes me. We're asked that fun question, what is that dream job of ours? When you were growing up, what was that dream job? Was it in the path that you are currently, or was it something completely different?
So I'll answer this in two parts. So dream job, I don't know if it was a dream job, but I know when I was younger and for a long time, I imagined myself being a veterinarian because I loved animals.
Okay.
So, you know, asking me this in my late 30s, I don't know if that would be a dream job because I winded up going into the healthcare realm anyway. So now, like a dream job for me would be like, I don't, you know, a best-selling author. And, I think I would never think of it at that age. So my my goal at such a young age was, help people in some capacity. And I think, it kind of transitioned from animals to humans as I got older, because even when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to do something healthcare related.
You talked a little bit about when you were 21, getting into the weight training, the athletic path. What was that path you were going on towards that included that?
Yeah, I think, as my family life deteriorated, so did my health, in the sense that I was gaining a lot of weight. So by the time I was finishing college, I was like 100 pounds overweight. So ultimately, it kind of sparked out of like aesthetics and well-being and trying to, look better at such a young age. But I think as it evolved, and it waxed and it waned, but as it evolved, there became a real appreciation for me being in tune with my body and understand how it's moving and what its limitations and strengths are at the same time.
With going over and taking on those obstacles with the gaining weight, did you have a coping mechanism that was in like utilizing for that? Something that you kind of made it not affect you, but you used it to kind of distract you from it.
Well, we're speaking about coping mechanisms, and the way I look back at my life is almost like it's been three different lives. So it's was like early childhood to eighth grade, then eighth grade to about 21, 22 years old, and then from that period till now. So I think when in we're talking about in this period, to me, which I kind of label my dark ages, there was a lot of dissociation where, I think part of it was me just living to reach a goal, which was to get through college and make,
Mhm.
a living for myself. And then there was other elements where I remember, like, because things were so miserable for me at this time, where like I would sometimes sit down with my laptop like in bed and just envision a whole other life that I was living.
What was that other life that you wanted to live?
It wasn't one specific life. It was kind of just, going into the moment and where I was at now. And sometimes I would play off my life circumstances and make them a little more appealing. And then sometimes I would drastically change everything. So where I was, um, a young man living in Philly to where I would be like, I don't know, a young girl living in New York City, and kind of letting my imagination run wild with that.
You mentioned it was the dark ages for you, or the dark times.
Mhm.
When did you kind of see that maybe it was getting turning to lighter? It was kind of starting to build momentum in a different direction, or you kind of were feeling yourself and really knowing this is the path that I wanted to go down.
Well, I think there was a period of like a long exhale, right? Once, I became a registered nurse and I started, having the means to care for myself and out of survival mode. But I think even in that period, there was almost like times where like the switch was off, because now I had to recover from all this trauma I experienced, and it wasn't going to happen all at once. Like uh, my mind and body wasn't ready for that, and I don't think most people's are. Um, I would say within that last chapter, or that last life, if you will, there was elements of awakenings, and there was a dark time in that period where it was like everything I've built my foundations on was tested
Mhm.
in a good way. And it was a big time of growth for me. And I think that's when I really saw the light, which probably wasn't, until like 7 years after that time.
You talked about throughout the interview about you have that passion to help others, and you mentioned being a nurse or a registered nurse at the time.
Mhm.
You being a nurse, you experience it all. You see a lot of things. People have opinions on what the nursing industry, the healthcare industry. What was something that challenged you, but you saw a growth in you from being a nurse?
I mean, there were so many moments. So, I was an RN and then I became a nurse practitioner, and I have two different nurse practitioner licenses. So, working as an RN, my goal at that time was, I have this career where I could explore all these opportunities. So before I make any decisions surrounding like what would be the next step or what for me to be, what would allow me to be built on, I wanted to try working in different areas. So I worked on just like a regular medical surgical hospital floor. I worked in an emergency room. I worked in an ICU. I worked in home care. And then I did some management before, all like in the process of like getting my master's to be a family nurse practitioner at the time. I think there was opportunities in all those different roles. So, the first role, my first year as a nurse was really just learning like what this profession looked like and what I could do. And also having a really bad schedule where I was working 11 to 7 overnights, 5 days a week, every other weekend. So that wasn't a sustainable life for me. So I only did it for a year. And then, I throughout nursing school, and I'm trying to think if it came before. No, I think it was just during nursing school I became very attracted to trauma and critical care. So I was like, okay, let me go into the emergency room or an ICU. And the emergency room came first. And it was a very, very busy level one trauma, burn unit, stroke center, ER with terrible staffing. And I hated it. I cried a lot of times. And I did it for a year full time, and then I went part time after a year when I went to the ICU. When I went to the ICU, there, I didn't know this at the time, but there was a lot of attention to detail in terms of your work and not just in how you cared for your patients. And while I did that probably the longest, it became the biggest like thorn, if you will, because like I'm a very big picture thinker and some of those details like aren't important to me.
Mhm.
So I think going through all these different areas, led me to the point where I was then working home care and working as a manager, and to the point where like I was 27 years old, like running a hospital by myself at night as a assistant directing nurse. And if I didn't have all those other experiences, I wouldn't have that knowledge to do it at such a young age. But then that's kind of like the first half of my career, right? So then I had opportunities elsewhere because once I kind of established like what did I want to do as a nurse practitioner, I thought I was going to be in plastic surgery and aesthetic medicine for a long time, and I didn't do it that long. I did it a couple of years. Um and it was because it was incredibly unfulfilling. And this is what I thought I wanted to do because as I struggled with my own image and appearance, I wanted to help people with theirs.
Mhm.
If I never made that move, though, I don't know if I would have ended up in mental health like I am now, because that's a lot of the conversations I was having with these patients where it would be around body image, relationship issues. And that was calling to me a lot more.
Well, of how you mentioned going through those different opportunities, because I think a lot of people have that when they get out of college. I want to do this, and they get so focused on that. And then when it doesn't happen for them, or it's not what they thought it was going to be, they don't know what direction to go next. And with you, you knew kind of like the umbrella of you wanted to be a nurse, but you didn't know what kind of area you were ready for or wanting. And you took advantage of the opportunity at each step. But then you talked about this last one where it was the plastic surgery part, but you were able to kind of connect with those patients, not from what they were doing, but from what they were going through mental health wise. Do you think that was kind of a strong suit for you that eventually led you to being a mental health nurse practitioner, that having those conversations, having what they're experiencing, not from what they're trying to do physically, but how it's going to help them emotionally or mentally?
Absolutely. I really come from an upbringing that's unfortunately rooted in a lot of dysfunction and emotional dysfunction. And I think, my own evolution as a person and a provider has gotten me to the point where at the time I didn't notice that like everyone deals with like some kinds of struggles within their, personal relationships, their parents and whatnot. And for a long time, I thought it was like I was alone in this. So I think seeing this and then realizing like the insight and wisdom I've had through my own experiences could be helpful to others. I mean, there's been definitely some professionals along the way that guided me toward this path, towards this path, but I think ultimately I would have came here one way or another.
Do you feel as a nurse, the introvert side of you has kind of come out more where you're not feeling that isolation side? Or do you feel that you have those moments, but you're able to balance both sides?
I don't think my introversion will affects me professionally. I think it's more so how I handle my social and interpersonal relationships, mostly because professionally I'm dealing with a lot of personalities.
Mhm.
So there needs to be some rest. There needs to be rest time and boundaries that I set for myself so that I have the energy to do this kind of work. But I don't think my introversion has really impacted how I perform professionally because there's been other experiences that I've had too along the way that's kind of pushed me outside of my comfort zone. So, I have experience working with pharmaceutical companies that have made me be or at least show up as like someone extroverted, and also gave me some business minded skills to create my own practice on my own. So I think, and I'm not sure now if I'm answering your question, but I think everything was a stepping stone into where I'm at now. So if anyone who is listening to this doesn't know where they're at, I think that's okay because certain things will reveal themselves to you if you kind of just be a little more patient.
No, that did answer it. That answered it right on the, and it's your experience from it.
Hmm.
I mean, we can't say it worked or it didn't because you're the one that
Hmm.
went through it. What do you see is next with your practice, your own practice with it? Do you see this is my path towards the future, or are you planning that I want to maybe try another area or build off of what you're doing?
So I think I look at it at two different ways, right? So, I work with a lot of singles right now looking to get into relationships. And next steps, for me clinically could look like, do I want to start doing couples counseling? Do I want to do family therapy? And that's really in the short term. But I think in tandem, you know, things that I'm working on outside of working with clients one on one or in a group, if you will, would be how can I have my message reach the masses? So,
Mhm.
looking at doing more publishing work, getting on podcasts like this to kind of share the message where, people that may not have the opportunity to work with me could still hear some of the things that I'm trying to say, eventually do a TED talk, all things in this direction that could help send the message to the masses versus me kind of doing it individually.
Going off of the relationship expert side, sometimes people have their concerns because is that person really an expert in relationships? Because we don't know what they have gone through. Are they currently in a relationship? Are they a relationship expert, but not in a relationship? How do you handle that kind of criticism that you see from media and public from what do they expect from a relationship expert?
Yeah, and I think I'm faced with this a lot more in my personal life than in my professional life. So, I think first to start, just because I have expertise in the relationship area of psychology or psychiatry does not mean I am a perfect person and I don't have my own flaws, my things I need to work through. However, I think, the ability to see things objectively, the ability to empathize with others and show compassion, and also know when to give a little tough love and some real life advice is kind of where this expertise builds off of. And I don't think for anyone who thinks that the testament to having good relationship skills is whether you're married, single, or whatever your situation is, because relationships are fluid throughout our own life. And it's not just about romantic relationships. We have familial relationships, co-working relationships, and I've done work in all these different areas to lend my expertise to itself.
I love how you talked about the different other areas because I think people just think it's relationships with love and that kind of relationship. And you kind of mentioned going into the other areas that people could really learn about and be even better at when it comes to friendships, families, coworkers, because I think a lot of people need the coworkers and friendships because do you feel that you learn a lot about your friendships, relationships, family relationships, coworker relationships from the people that you help? You kind of see what goes on in other people's worlds, and you're like, am I doing the same thing? Am I doing something different? Does it kind of work where you're using your experience and their experience to kind of see what works?
I think looking at relationships as a whole, these are opportunities for us to grow. And there's so many different ways that they could show up in a mirror of anything that we need to be worked on, right? So I think not all the time, but there's been times I've been in sessions with clients where I'm, kind of grappling with my own insights in the moment of, I can relate to this person. I've been there, done this, or even introducing a new perspective because like this isn't like the Dr. Dioka way. Like life is dynamic. So and there's not just like a one system approach to handling these types of things. I will say that when I am working with clients, one of the first things that I will ask is, and a lot of them are coming to me about, issues within their romantic relationships. But I'm like, well, let's look at the other relationships and how you handle those, because that will be telling of a lot.
How do you feel people are finding you? Like, where do you feel your specialty is that people are coming to you for your expertise?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? So my expertise in what?
With a lot of people out there that do similar things to you,
Mhm.
why do you feel people are connecting towards you when they're coming for a relationship expert or even the nurse practitioner part? Why do you feel, do you have like that marketing plan that comes and people, oh, someone just walked right behind you. Um,
Oh, that's my dog. You got me nervous for a second.
where do you feel that people are really connecting with you and getting the expertise?
Um, I think it's different ways. When someone or anyone's working with the therapist, like you have to see what connects, right?
Yep.
So it could be personality traits, it could be how they ask you questions, it could be their ability to kind of sit in silence sometimes and see if you'll open up, or sometimes if it's that push that you need. I will say I kind of give us a disclaimer of what they should expect up front from working with me and what will kind of differentiate myself to some other therapists they may be accustomed. So it could be, that honest, straightforward, direct feedback that I provide. And also, I think some people lean towards a nurse practitioner that does psychotherapy only because we could prescribe as well. And
Mhm.
a lot of psychiatrists don't want to do psychotherapy. They're doing a lot of medication management.
We talked about your professional journey that you've been on, but let's dig into the personal side. When you're not working, what do people see you doing? What are you liking to do that maybe people don't know that you like to enjoy?
Um, so two things. So you've seen part of it. So I have this little chihuahua that just ran in here. So I spend a lot of time with her. And she's very cuddly, cute, and affectionate. But I think another thing that would shock people that don't know me is I'm a huge reality TV junkie.
Okay.
Mhm.
What shows specifically are you attached to?
I think it's mostly the network. So I'm a big Bravo fan. So all the Housewives, Summer House, Southern Charm, all those, I eat it up.
Feel like we could do an episode on just
Mhm.
shows because I'm like already rewatching all those Bravo shows, the Summer Houses, the Vanderpumps. I mean,
Mhm.
do you feel that when you're watching those shows, it's kind of a good question. Are you analyzing? I mean, it's obviously reality TV, but their relationships, how you can see boss to coworker or employee relationships, friendships. Do you kind of analyze those when you're watching those shows?
I do. And it's funny that you asked me this because over the weekend I got like this creative inspiration to start writing about some of these, like in a blog format of some sort. So it's something I'm kind of toying around with, um, where I'm kind of looking at dynamics amongst the cast or maybe two relationships and kind of giving a psychological portrayal of what could be happening here.
Do you kind of, and you could do like a content create like a
Hmm. Hmm.
video like on YouTube or on social
Hmm.
media about it. And I think people would just start watching it because they'd be like, what does this person think so about this? I mean,
Hmm.
fans can literally just go crazy because they're like analyzing every little detail and they'll flash back to 5 years ago about something. What do you feel is next for you? What are you hoping to see in the future in the next few years? Anything exciting? You kind of talked about what you kind of want to do, publishing and things like that. But any goals you have set for yourself?
Yeah. So I actually teach and I practice as well. So I teach for a local nursing school, and that ended. So now I have the summer off and just seeing clients. And I think for this short term time, a lot of it's gonna be on scholarly publishing. Um, so I'm looking to write a piece right now with a co-author on resiliency and entitlement in undergraduate students. So I think looking at psychological phenomenons like this and giving it a scholarly spin to it, that's what my kind of immediate next calling is.
Mhm.
Um, but also just to kind of take this time this summer to look and see what's next for me in terms of my clinical side. And I think it's going to be towards family therapy and family systems therapy.
The final question I'll ask you for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
I think the biggest piece of advice is the power of the mind is very powerful. So the more introspection and reflection you can have, the better in terms of allowing yourself to find out one, these systems or these beliefs that were instilled with me. Do they resonate? Is this something I really want for myself? And just to give a little context to this is, for instance, like being married by 30 years old. Like, is this something imposed on me or something that I want for myself? Being in a certain career path. Because once we really get a clear vision of who we are, then what we could create can become very powerful. And it's not just that vision that's helpful, but like all this time spent alone analyzing our thoughts, analyzing why we might have some kind of limiting beliefs around certain things. So maybe like if I thought I never could become an author or there's no money in this or something like that, like really breaking these down and seeing how true they are and seeing once you do that, like where your life shifts because there's so much still we don't know about our subconscious minds and their ability to create our circumstances. So I think that the more we could become self-aware and self-actualize, the more it'll help us with what we're trying to achieve.
John, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
And thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Tune in next time to hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow, subscribe on all major audio platforms, and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get full length episode in video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.